The banker slid the deed across the table with shaking hands. $1. That was all old Morrison wanted for 300 acres of prime grazing land. Nolan Briggs stared at the paper, his weathered fingers tracing the edge. Nobody sold a ranch for $1 unless something was terribly wrong with it. The banker wouldn't meet his eyes, kept glancing toward the door like he expected someone to burst in and stop the transaction. Nolan had driven out here with his life savings, ready to pay fair market value. 15 years of working other men's cattle, sleeping in bunkhouses, saving every penny while his wife grew distant, and their marriage crumbled over empty nurseries and broken promises. The doctor's words still echoed in his head from 3 months ago. Infertile, the one word that had shattered everything he thought his life would be. The ranch sat 40 miles from the nearest town, isolated enough that a man could disappear if he wanted to, which was exactly what Nolan needed. No more pitying looks from neighbors who whispered about Sarah leaving him for a man who could give her children. No more Sunday sermons about God's plan, when he'd lost faith that any plan included him. But $1. Morrison had built this place from nothing, raised 5 sons here before they all scattered to the winds. The old man's hands had been steady as rocks when he'd worked cattle, never missed a shot with his rifle, never showed fear of anything. Yet here he sat across from the banker, his signature on the transfer papers looking like it had been written during an earthquake. The house stood solid enough when Nolan pulled up in his dusty truck, 2 stories of weathered wood that had seen better decades but still held strong bones. The corral fencing needed repair, and the barn door hung crooked on its hinges, but nothing a man with time and determination couldn't fix. The well pump worked when he tested it, clear water flowing steady and cold, but it was the silence that struck him most. Not the peaceful quiet of open country, but the kind of silence that felt like held breath, like the land itself was waiting for something to happen. The cattle were gone, of course, sold off before Morrison made his desperate deal. The fields lay empty, winter grass brown and bent by wind. Nolan walked the property line as the sun began its descent, checking fence posts and noting what needed attention. His boots crunched through dry leaves that had gathered in the corners of the old stable. The building was larger than it appeared from outside, with stalls for 12 horses and a loft overhead for hay storage. That's when he heard it. A sound that didn't belong in an abandoned stable. Soft, rhythmic, like someone trying very hard not to make any noise at all. He froze, listening. There it was again, coming from the back corner stall, barely audible above the wind rattling the loose boards. Nolan moved carefully toward the sound, his hand instinctively reaching for the knife on his belt. In the dim light filtering through gaps in the wooden walls, he could make out a pile of horse blankets that seemed to rise and fall with an odd regularity. Someone was breathing under those blankets. Someone was hiding in his stable, and they had no idea he was there. Nolan pulled the blanket back slowly, prepared for anything except what he found. A girl, maybe 19 or 20, with dark hair matted against her face and eyes that snapped open the moment light hit them. She didn't scream or try to run. Instead, she pressed herself back against the stable wall, one hand instinctively moving to protect her rounded belly. She was pregnant, very pregnant by the look of it. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'll leave. I just needed somewhere warm for the night." Nolan stepped back, his mind racing. This explained Morrison's desperation to sell, the banker's nervous glances, the feeling that the ranch held secrets. The old man hadn't been selling his life's work for $1. He'd been paying someone to take on his problem. "How long have you been here?" Nolan asked, keeping his voice low and steady. 3 days, she answered, then seemed to realize honesty might not serve her well. I just got here this morning. I was just resting." But the way she had arranged the blankets into a makeshift bed, the careful positioning that allowed her to see both entrances to the stable, and the small pile of empty food tins tucked behind a feed bucket told a different story. She'd been living here much longer than 3 days. Morrison had known about her, had been feeding her, and when the situation became too dangerous or complicated, he'd found someone else to handle it. "What's your name?" Nolan asked. "Ivy," she said after a moment's hesitation. "Ivy Boone." The name hit him strangely. He'd heard it somewhere before, whispered in the kind of conversations that stopped when strangers walked into saloons. Something about a rancher's daughter who'd run off, caused some kind of trouble that had men talking in careful voices. "Ivy Boone," he repeated. "You're Jeremiah Boone's daughter." The way her face went white confirmed it. Jeremiah Boone owned half the territory north of here, had political connections that reached all the way to the territorial capital, and a reputation for settling disputes with bullets rather than lawyers. If his daughter was hiding in an abandoned stable, pregnant and alone, something had gone very wrong in the Boone family. "He doesn't know where I am," she said quickly. "And he can't find out." "Why not?" "Because he'll kill me," she said, her hand moving protectively over her belly. "Or worse, he'll kill my baby." Nolan studied her face, looking for signs of deception or hysteria. What he saw instead was the kind of calm certainty that came from knowing exactly how dangerous your situation was. This wasn't a girl running away from a strict father. This was someone fleeing for her life. "Whose baby is it?" he asked. Ivy's eyes filled with tears, but her voice stayed steady. "Someone my father trusted. Someone he would never suspect." In the distance, Nolan heard something that made his blood run cold. The sound of multiple horses approaching fast, their hooves drumming against the hard ground in the rhythm of men who rode with purpose. Someone was coming, and by the sound of it, they weren't planning on a friendly visit. "Get in the back stall," Nolan whispered urgently, grabbing Ivy's arm to help her up. "Stay quiet no matter what happens." But she shook her head, pressing something cold and metal into his hand. A derringer, small enough to hide in a boot but deadly at close range. "They're not here for you," she said. "They're here for me, and they won't stop looking until they find me." The hoofbeats grew louder, accompanied now by the jingle of spurs and the creak of leather. Nolan counted at least 4 horses, maybe 5. Too many for coincidence, too organized for casual travelers. These men had come here with a purpose. "Who sent them?" Nolan asked, checking the derringer's chambers. Both barrels loaded. "My father's foreman, Cyrus Thorne. He's been hunting me for 2 weeks." Ivy's voice carried the exhaustion of someone who'd been running too long with nowhere safe to stop. "Morrison was supposed to keep me hidden until I could get farther west, but something spooked him." The horses pulled up outside the stable, their breathing heavy from a hard ride. Boots hit the ground, spurs ringing against stone as the men spread out to surround the building. Nolan could hear them moving with military precision, covering exits and checking sight lines. "Morrison, you old fool," a voice called out, rough and commanding. "We know she's here. Make this easy on yourself." Nolan's jaw tightened. They thought Morrison was still here, still protecting the girl, which meant they didn't know about the sale, didn't know a new owner had taken possession. That gave him one small advantage, but only if he could figure out how to use it. "Check the house first," the same voice ordered. "Brady, you and Collins circle around back. Nobody gets out without us seeing." Ivy grabbed Nolan's shirt, her fingers digging into the fabric. "You don't understand," she whispered. "It's not just about me being pregnant. The baby's father, he's someone important. Someone whose reputation would be destroyed if people knew." "Who?" "Judge Hamilton Morrison. The territorial judge everyone thinks is so righteous." Her words came out in a rush, desperate to make him understand. "He's been visiting my father's ranch for months, supposedly on business, but he's been coming to my room at night. When I told him about the baby, he said he'd rather see me dead than let anyone know." The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Morrison hadn't been protecting her out of kindness. His own brother was the father of her child, and selling the ranch was his way of washing his hands of the whole mess. $1 to transfer the problem to someone else, someone who might not ask the right questions. The stable door crashed open, flooding the interior with harsh daylight. A silhouette filled the entrance, broad shoulders and the unmistakable shape of a rifle held ready. "Well, well," Cyrus Thorne's voice echoed through the stable. "Looks like old Morrison found himself a buyer after all." Nolan stepped forward, positioning himself between Thorne and the back stalls where Ivy was hidden. The foreman was a big man, the kind who'd built his reputation with his fists and maintained it with fear. Behind him, 3 more men filtered into the stable, rifles ready and eyes scanning every shadow. "Cyrus Thorne," Nolan said, keeping his voice steady. "Heard you work for Jeremiah Boone." "I do. And you are?" "Nolan Briggs. Just bought this place." He gestured around the stable, trying to project casual ownership while his heart hammered against his ribs. "Looking to start fresh, run some cattle." Thorne's eyes narrowed, studying him with the calculating gaze of a man who made his living reading people's intentions. "Funny thing about starting fresh, Briggs. Sometimes the past follows you anyway." One of the other men, a wiry character with nervous eyes, shifted his weight and spoke up. "Boss, we should check those back stalls. She could be hiding anywhere." "She?" Nolan asked, raising an eyebrow. "You boys lose something?" "Jeremiah's daughter went missing 2 weeks ago," Thorne said, never taking his eyes off Nolan. "Young girl, pregnant, not thinking straight. Her father's worried sick about her condition, wants to make sure she gets proper medical care." It was smoothly delivered, the kind of lie that would sound reasonable to anyone who didn't know the truth. But Nolan had seen the terror in Ivy's eyes, had heard the desperation in her voice when she talked about her father's intentions. This wasn't a rescue mission. This was a hunt. "Haven't seen any young ladies around here," Nolan said. "But then again, I only took possession this morning. Morrison might have seen something before he left." "Where'd he go?" "Didn't say. Just handed me the deed and rode out like his tail was on fire." Thorne stepped closer, close enough that Nolan could smell the tobacco on his breath and see the cold calculation in his pale eyes. "Mind if we take a look around? Just to be thorough." It wasn't really a question. The men were already moving, spreading out through the stable with practiced efficiency. But Nolan had spent enough time in dangerous situations to recognize when compliance would only make things worse. These men weren't going to leave empty-handed, and if they found Ivy, she wouldn't survive the return trip to her father's ranch. "Actually, I do mind," Nolan said, his hand moving casually toward the derringer hidden in his jacket. "This is private property now and you're trespassing." Thorne smiled, but there was no humor in it. "Private property. That's interesting, considering the deed Morrison signed had some unusual conditions attached to it." "What kind of conditions?" "The kind that said if certain property went missing from this ranch, the sale would be null and void. The land would revert back to the Boone family, along with anything found on it." Nolan's blood went cold. Morrison hadn't just sold him a ranch for $1. He'd sold him into a trap, set up the whole transaction to ensure that when Thorne came looking for Ivy, they'd have legal justification to take both the land and the girl. Behind him, he heard the faintest rustle from the back stall where Ivy was hiding. One of Thorne's men heard it too, his head snapping toward the sound like a hound catching a scent. "Found something, boss," the man called out, raising his rifle. Nolan moved fast, drawing the derringer as he spun toward the man who'd heard Ivy. The small gun barked twice, both shots finding their mark in the man's chest before he could bring his rifle to bear. The gunman dropped hard, his weapon clattering across the stable floor. "Kill him!" Thorne shouted, diving for cover behind a support beam. But Nolan was already moving, grabbing the fallen rifle and rolling behind a feed trough as bullets splintered the wood around him. The stable erupted in chaos, muzzle flashes lighting the dim interior as lead flew in both directions. "Ivy, stay down!" he called out, levering another round into the rifle chamber. From her hiding place he heard her cry out in pain, not from a bullet, but something else entirely, the kind of sound a woman made when her body was telling her it was time, ready or not. "Nolan," she gasped between the gunshots. "Something's wrong. The baby's coming." Of all the times for labor to start, the stress, the fear, the physical strain of running and hiding had finally caught up with her. Nolan cursed under his breath, trying to calculate how many rounds he had left and how long he could hold off 3 armed men while a woman gave birth 20 feet away. "Brady's down," one of Thorne's men called out. "This bastard can shoot." "Then don't give him targets," Thorne snarled back. "Collins, circle around to the side door. Murphy, keep him pinned down while I flank from the front." They were coordinating now, using military tactics instead of rushing in blind. Nolan had maybe 2 minutes before they surrounded him completely. He needed a way out, but leaving meant abandoning Ivy, and staying meant they'd both die in this stable. That's when he remembered what Morrison had told the banker about the ranch. Built it from nothing, raised 5 sons here. Morrison had been a fighting man in his younger days, had survived Indian raids and cattle wars. Men like that didn't build their homes without planning for trouble. Nolan looked up at the loft overhead, noting how the support beams ran all the way to the back wall. There had to be another way out of here. Something Morrison had built for emergencies. Old ranchers always had escape routes. "Ivy," he called softly. "Can you move?" "I don't know," she gasped. "Everything hurts." Another contraction hit her, stronger this time, and Nolan realized they were past the point of waiting. This baby was coming whether they were safe or not. He had to get her out of here before Thorne's men closed their trap. "There's a ladder to the loft behind you," he said. "Can you climb?" "I'll try." Nolan laid down covering fire, sending rapid shots toward both doors to keep Thorne's men honest. In the brief silence that followed, he heard Ivy struggling to her feet. her breathing labored but determined. Then Murphy appeared at the side door, rifle ready, and Nolan realized his covering fire had given away his position. The man had a clear shot, and there was nowhere left to run. But instead of shooting at Nolan, Murphy was staring at something behind him with an expression of pure shock. Judge Hamilton Morrison stood in the stable doorway. His black coat and silver hair making him look like death itself had come calling. Behind him were 4 more riders, their badges catching what little light filtered through the wooden walls. Federal marshals by the look of them, with the kind of authority that could override local jurisdiction. "Lower your weapons," the judge commanded, his voice carrying the weight of years on the bench. "All of you." Murphy's rifle dropped immediately, but Thorne hesitated, his face twisted with confusion and anger. "Judge Morrison, sir, we're here on Jeremiah Boone's orders. His daughter, I know exactly why you're here." "Cyrus," the judge cut him off, "and I'm telling you to stand down." From the loft above, Nolan heard Ivy cry out again, the sound of a woman deep in labor. The judge's face went pale, and for the first time since entering the stable, his composure cracked. This wasn't the controlled confrontation he'd planned. The situation was spiraling beyond anyone's ability to manage it. "Your Honor," Thorne tried again, "Jeremiah Boone has legal authority over his daughter. She's carrying his grandchild. She's carrying my child," the judge said quietly. The admission hung in the air like smoke from a discharged weapon. Thorne's men exchanged glances, uncertainty replacing the confidence they'd shown moments before. They'd signed on to hunt down a rancher's wayward daughter, not to get caught in the middle of a territorial judge's personal scandal. "That changes nothing," Thorne said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Mr. Boone wants her back." "Mr. Boone wants her dead," Judge Morrison replied. "Along with any evidence of what I've done. He's using you, Cyrus. When you bring her back, you'll be accessories to murder." One of the marshals stepped forward, his hand resting on his sidearm. "Judge, we need to discuss this situation privately." But there was no time for discussion. Ivy's cries were getting stronger and more frequent. Whatever was happening up in that loft, it was happening fast. Nolan kept his rifle trained on Thorne while trying to process this new development. The judge's arrival might have stopped the immediate shooting, but it had also complicated everything. Federal marshals meant this case would go all the way to the territorial capital, which meant publicity, trials, and the kind of attention that destroyed reputations and ended careers. "She needs a doctor," Nolan called out. "Politics can wait." "The nearest doctor is 40 miles away," Judge Morrison said. "She'll never make it." "Then someone better know something about delivering babies," Nolan replied. That's when Thorne smiled, the first genuine expression he'd shown since entering the stable. "Funny you should mention that," he said. "Murphy here used to be a field medic in the war. Delivered plenty of babies when the regular doctors weren't available." Murphy shifted uncomfortably under everyone's gaze. "That was different, boss. Those were emergency situations." "This is an emergency situation," Judge Morrison said. "And if anything happens to that girl or her child, I'll see you all hang for murder." From above came another cry, this one different from the others. Desperate, terrified. "Something's wrong," Ivy called down, her voice weak. "Please, someone help me." Murphy climbed the ladder to the loft, his medical training overriding his loyalty to Thorne. What he found up there made him curse under his breath. Ivy was losing too much blood, her face white as winter snow, and the baby was coming breech. "I need hot water, clean cloth, and whiskey," he called down, "and someone who can hold her steady." Nolan started toward the ladder, but Thorne's rifle swung toward him. "Stay put, Briggs. You've caused enough trouble." "Let him go," Judge Morrison ordered. "That's my child being born up there." "Your bastard child," Thorne corrected. "The child that's going to destroy your career and probably start a war between you and Jeremiah Boone." The judge's jaw tightened. "Jeremiah already knows. Why do you think he wants the girl dead? He can't afford to have his family name attached to this scandal, and he sure as hell can't afford to cross me openly." One of the federal marshals stepped forward. "Judge, we need to discuss charges. Corruption, abuse of power, statutory." "Marshal Davis, I've been expecting those charges for weeks," Morrison replied calmly. "But right now, there's a young woman bleeding to death in my brother's stable, and politics can wait." From the loft came Murphy's voice, tight with concern. "She's hemorrhaging bad. If we don't stop this bleeding soon, we're going to lose both of them." That's when Nolan made his decision. He'd spent 15 years watching life pass him by, accepting that some things weren't meant to be his. but he'd be damned if he'd let another child die because adults couldn't set aside their pride and fear. He started up the ladder, rifle still in hand. Thorne aimed at him but hesitated, unwilling to start another gunfight with federal marshals present. The moment of hesitation was all Nolan needed. In the loft, Ivy was conscious but barely, her hand gripping Murphy's arm with desperate strength. "Is my baby going to die?" she whispered. "Not if I can help it," Murphy said, then looked at Nolan. "I need you to hold her shoulders steady while I try to turn the baby." For the next 10 minutes, nothing existed except the fight to save 2 lives. Nolan had delivered calves before, but this was different. This was a woman who'd trusted him to protect her. A child who deserved a chance at life regardless of the circumstances of its conception. "There," Murphy said finally, his hands bloody but his voice relieved. Got him turned around. The baby came in a rush then, small and slippery, and absolutely silent. Too silent. Murphy worked frantically, clearing the infant's airway, rubbing his back trying to coax that first crucial breath. Below them, the stable had gone completely quiet, everyone waiting, listening for the sound that would mean success or failure. Then it came. A thin, angry wail that echoed off the wooden walls like the most beautiful music anyone had ever heard. But when Nolan looked down at Ivy, she wasn't breathing. Murphy pressed his ear to Ivy's chest, then immediately began pushing on her ribcage in steady, rhythmic compressions. "She's lost too much blood," he said grimly. Heart stopped. Nolan took the crying baby, wrapping him in his own shirt while Murphy worked to save the mother. The child was small, but seemed healthy, his lungs working perfectly as he announced his displeasure at being born into such chaos. "Come on, girl," Murphy muttered, continuing the chest compressions. "You've come too far to quit now." After what felt like an eternity, Ivy gasped, her eyes fluttering open. Weak, but alive. Murphy sagged with relief, then immediately began checking her pulse and breathing. "She needs real medical care," he called down. Soon, Judge Morrison had been standing at the bottom of the ladder, his face showing every one of his 60 years. "Marshal Davis," he said quietly, "I'm ready to face whatever charges you deem appropriate. But first, I want to ensure this woman and child are taken care of." "That won't be necessary," came a new voice from the stable entrance. Jeremiah Boone stepped into the building, flanked by more armed men. But instead of the rage everyone expected, his face showed something else entirely. Exhaustion, defeat, the look of a man who'd finally realized the cost of his pride. "Ivy," he called up to the loft. "Are you alive, girl?" "Yes, Papa," she answered weakly. "And my grandson?" "Your grandson is fine, Mr. Boone," Nolan replied, still holding the baby. Jeremiah looked around the stable, taking in the body of Brady, the standoff between his men and the federal marshals, the blood, the chaos his family's secrets had created. "Cyrus," he said finally, "take the boys home. This ends here." "But boss," "It ends here." Jeremiah's voice cracked like a whip. "I've lost enough. I won't lose my daughter and grandson too." 3 months later, Nolan stood on the porch of the house he'd bought for $1, watching Ivy hang laundry on the line. The baby, named James after no one in particular, slept in a basket nearby. The doctor had said both mother and child would be fine with proper care and rest. Judge Morrison had resigned from the bench and moved east, but not before signing papers that made Nolan the child's legal guardian and Ivy's official protector. Jeremiah Boone had quietly settled a substantial sum on his daughter, enough to ensure she'd never want for anything. Thorne had found work elsewhere, and the federal marshals had closed their investigation when all parties agreed to let sleeping dogs lie. Some evenings, when the sunset painted the sky red and gold, Nolan would hold James while Ivy cooked dinner, and he'd think about how sometimes life gave you exactly what you needed, just not the way you expected to get it. He'd never had the family he'd dreamed of with Sarah, but he'd found something better. He'd found the family that chose him back. If you're enjoying the story, subscribe to the channel. Now click on the video on the screen to hear a story even better than this one, with an ending so surprising you won't forget it anytime soon. Click on the video now.